This child and his siblings suffered unimaginable abuse and lived in fear every day. This was one of the worst cases we've seen.
Another child allegedly killed at the hands of his mom and her boyfriend. The latest jailed couple has been denied bond out in Michigan as the accusations against them are made public. We're getting insight on the investigation with former crime scene investigator and forensic expert Alina Burroughs. Welcome to Sidebar, presented by Law&Crime. I'm Jesse Weber. A little 6-year-old boy, Giovanni Jennings, who was called Chulo by his family, died from horrific injuries that prosecutors say were the result of child abuse. July 30th, first responders were called out to a mobile home community in Oakland County, Michigan. Chulo was in one of those homes, unconscious and with injuries all over his body. He was rushed to a hospital. He was transferred to a children's hospital, but he died around midnight. The little boy's mother, 25-year-old Elaine Jennings, and this mother's boyfriend, 32-year-old Daniel Giacchina, were arrested originally on charges of lying to police and possession of weapons, but then on Friday, the prosecutors announced they were upgrading those charges. And before we even dive into that, and there is a lot to get into, I want to bring in former crime scene investigator and forensic expert Alina Burroughs to talk about this. Alina, thanks so much for coming on. I want to get your take on the different parts of this investigation, but first let me start. Have you heard about this case? Is it, or does this, maybe you haven't heard of it, but it's eerily similar to what you've seen before?
Yeah, unfortunately, I have heard of this case, and I could have predicted some of the details before I heard them because this is such a familiar story, sadly.
Yep. It's, unfortunately, we've been covering a lot of them here on Sidebar, which, I think it aggravates and it frustrates a lot of people, as well as saddens us about why this is happening. But let's go through it. Because on Friday, the prosecutor in this case, Karen McDonald, held a press conference. Let's take a listen.
Last week, my office filed charges against his mother, Elaine Jennings, and her boyfriend, Daniel Giacchina, for lying to the police, and additional charges against defendant Giacchina for improperly possessing weapons and ammunition because he was already a convicted felon. But it was clear from the evidence that we saw that there was a pattern of abuse that led to Chulo's death. My office, in conjunction with the Madison Heights Police Department, has spent the last week performing an intensive review of every piece of available evidence, including cell phone evidence, photos, and evidence that was seized in search warrants. Combined, we have spent over 100 hours reviewing extremely disturbing videos and photos, as well as text messages and Facebook chats describing the horrific things that happened to this 6-year-old boy.
And it's our understanding the charges were upgraded to murder and first-degree child abuse. So, Alina, we are seeing this now in this day and age, practically in every case that we cover, this mountain of digital evidence for investigators and prosecutors to sort through. What's your reaction to those numbers we just heard?
It's an unfortunate circumstance that we see these child abuse and homicide cases occur so frequently. The amount of digital evidence that we're seeing, either communication via text message or social media, it ends up being more evidence to prove the case. So to me, it's a great thing to have. It's going to make the case a lot easier to charge.
And you know what's even more alarming is that reporting indicates that Jennings allegedly directed Giacchina to abuse her own son, and the two had laughed about it on text message. That's the allegation, which, if true, I don't know, that feels like walking yourself straight into a conviction.
Yeah, certainly seems like an aggravating circumstance to me. This wasn't a child that was exhibiting terrible behavior. The child was trying to drink. The child was trying to look out a window. And the child was trying to urinate. And these are things that they're considering punishable offenses.
And according to the Special Victims Unit investigators, Chulo also had 2 younger siblings who seemingly had to witness this alleged abuse. The details are just absolutely atrocious. The Oakland County prosecutor explained what the state believes happened in that mobile home to just illustrate why the charges were upgraded.
As we carefully sifted through the evidence, what we found can only be described as horrific. The allegations are that Chulo was confined to a pen in the defendant's bedroom. He was beaten, he was bound to the wall by using a staple gun to his clothes to the wall, which forced his face into a corner. He was badly injured, but he was not taken for medical treatment because his mother knew that a medical examination would reveal the abuse.
And Alina, that is eerily similar to what we've heard in the past. Maybe
Yes.
your reaction during it, but the idea that they don't want to take him to medical professionals because, they don't want to get in trouble.
Right. It's probably the same reason that he wasn't in school. I know in the state of Michigan, school's not mandatory until the child's 6 years old. So depending on when his birthday fell, he should have either been enrolled in school or being actively attending school. And a lot of times when law enforcement becomes aware of abuse, it's through teachers. I've worked plenty of cases where a child's maybe dirtied up their shirt on the playground and the teacher goes to change their shirt and sees scarring or bruising or pattern injuries that indicate child abuse. So it doesn't surprise me that the parents were either trying to keep him out of school or certainly not calling for medical attention.
Well, and let's be clear about this. So first of all, we're going to get into more of the idea of the physical evidence or the actual evidence that would back up these claims in a minute. But this is the mother and the mother's boyfriend, because here's what's happening with the father. Investigators say that Jennings lied to them, that she pointed the finger at Chulo's biological father. So police end up arresting the dad, but they determined he wasn't anywhere near Chulo during the time that he died. And prosecutors say they officially eliminated him as a suspect. Alina, is that common? Pointing the finger at another parent, at another caretaker?
Yeah, I've frequently seen not as much the biological parent, but a boyfriend or somebody that's in the house, not especially one that's related to the child, but perpetrating the abuse. And then it's not uncommon to see them put the child, depending on age, put the child in a playpen or in a carrier or do something and then just say that they happened upon the child and the child was unconscious somehow. And then autopsy obviously would reveal further, but this isn't a surprising circumstance.
Or especially if there's a custody dispute, not a custody dispute, there's a custody arrangement, and the child goes to live with one parent for a weekend, comes back, and if they die, there's so many times they'll be like, well, it was something from the parent did over the weekend, and then you're dealing with the timing of the injuries, the proximity of the injuries, how quickly the injury resulted in the death, and that becomes kind of a complicated situation too when you're seeing joint custody of a child.
Definitely. But when we look at things like bruising, anybody that's ever received a bruise knows that it goes through stages, and it initially might be red and then it goes through like a purple blue stage. And then the very last stages of bruising are like a yellowish or a green. So there's a pattern of abuse that we see here through multiple injuries. And then these bruising almost have a time stamp or a date stamp on them. So within a window, you can't say that the child was abused 24 hours ago if he has green, yellow bruising, because those are clearly healing and are past that stage. So I'm sure that was one of the first things they're looking at are the injuries consistent with the timeline given?
I'm glad you mentioned that, because the chief prosecutor, unfortunately, we have to go through this because it's important to understand why the charges were upgraded and what the evidence is. The chief prosecutor listed the parts of Chulo's body that were injured during this alleged pattern of abuse.
Photos taken during an autopsy in Wayne County revealed that Chulo had bruising and laceration on his entire body, including to his scalp, temples, lips, inner mouth, cheeks, forehead, chin, shoulder, forearms, fingers, thumbs, back, buttocks, inner thighs, knees, and shins. Notably, Chulo had pervasive bruising to his abdomen, which was also bloated and distended. He had an apparent BB wound to his shin. First responders and emergency room personnel noted extensive external injuries as well. Cell phone evidence has revealed that Chulo Jennings was being severely abused by the defendants. Chulo was beaten by Giacchina on multiple occasions. While that abuse sometimes happened while Jennings was at work, Jennings was aware of it and approved of the physical assaults, and at times even encouraged Giacchina to abuse Chulo. The abuse involved physical violence and assault, including shooting at Chulo, with a BB gun. For punishment, Chulo was confined to a pen in a corner of Giacchina's and Jennings' bedroom, where he was left to try and sleep on a wooden slat measuring 11 inches by 36 inches. A black curtain was put in place so Chulo couldn't see out, and barricades were used to keep him in place.
This is such scary stuff. And you think to yourself, how can people allegedly do this? What do you even know about the people in your life? What do you know about the people you surround yourself with? It's scary to think about. But that is why we are so excited to partner up with Truthfinder. This is the sponsor of Sidebar. This is a service that can maybe provide you some answers because it's one of the largest public records search services in the United States. You go on their website, truthfinder.com, you type in a name, and within minutes and a paid subscription purchase, you can access unlimited reports that can include information like phone numbers, location history, criminal and traffic records. Also, if you type in an address within a report, it can show you registered sex offenders that may live in an area, which is just honestly kind of wild to see. So whether it's researching new dates or friends or reconnecting with people, Truthfinder is a great tool. And right now, you can get 50% off of your first month of confidential background reports. Just go to truthfinder.com/LC Sidebar. Alina, we may not have Chulo here to explain what happened to him, but so many times in these cases, the autopsy, the injuries tell us the story and tell us the truth of what happened, right?
100%. And in this case, having significant injuries all over his body, both external and internal, is going to paint the picture of that pattern of abuse. We have physical evidence in this case. We have testimonial evidence in this case. We have digital forensics in this case. So while this is certainly terrible for us to look at, I don't think this case is going to be particularly challenging to prosecute.
Have you ever heard, every child abuse case is pretty graphic and terrible, but there's certain elements to this one that I haven't even heard before, the stapling to keep somebody in place. What do you make of this?
It unfortunately looks like in this case, when we see biological parent and step parent or biological parent boyfriend scenarios, it looks like they're almost using the abuse of this child as an experience to bond them in their relationship. Many times we see somebody acquiescing to the other that have differing opinions on how to punish a child. But here it actually looks like they were relishing this and using this as an experience to become closer as a couple.
Yeah. And before I even go into the next piece of evidence, as if the text messages, the injuries, the physical evidence from the home wasn't enough. I'll get to something else in a second, but so common in these cases, right, is, well, the injuries could have been caused because the child is messing around. They're on the jungle gym, they fall down. They use the idea of the youth of the victim to say they're tumbling around, it's their own, they have knocks and injuries all over themselves. They always have injuries. Children always have injuries on themselves. But what's the difficulty for defendants like these defendants in this kind of case?
Kids are going to have injuries, certainly. And any parent knows where those injuries are. They're on knees from falling down, skinning knees, falling off bikes, elbows, any areas of prominence. When we see things like what I would expect on this autopsy, he's got bruising certainly covering the vast majority of his body. That is not normal unless the child has a medical condition that leaves them very prone to bruising or to injury. So it's okay for a child to have a few bruises here and there on an elbow or a shin. It's not okay for the child to have injuries on buttocks, on thighs, on their scalp, on their legs, on their arms, on their face. And what I would anticipate would be injuries on the interior lips. A lot of times, forcefully putting a hand over the face will cause the teeth to bruise the softer tissues of the mouth. Those are not typical injuries that a child would receive from playing.
Now, you remember I said there was another piece of evidence? Well, prosecutors say that Jennings and Giacchina, they bought a home security camera, and they set it up to monitor not intruders like normal people would, but rather to monitor this 6-year-old boy as he was essentially confined to a corner in the room. That's the allegation, that the two would allegedly watch the camera feed, punish Chulo for any misbehavior like urinating, drinking, leaving in the corner, looking out the window. Again, more potential digital evidence for investigators use to potentially convict the couple. Alina, I'm surprised that if they were so concerned about getting caught and wouldn't even want to go to, a medical examiner, medical professionals to treat the injuries because they were afraid of getting caught, why would they document it like this? That's the part that seems so strange.
Absolutely. And when we see child abuse on children who receive injuries on a routine basis, oftentimes the parents do try to keep the injuries somewhere where clothing would conceal it, so that if they're out in public, nobody can recognize this. So we see a lot of injuries on the back or the stomach, things that a regular T-shirt would cover. Here, it doesn't seem like the parents are concerned about injuries showing on most parts of his body. The fact that they purchased this camera indicates too that they took time. They're taking time to think about this. This is not a spur of the moment. The child's done something terrible and they, grab him and, give him punishment. This is a well thought out, timed. They're spending money on this. There are a whole lot of things here, in addition, the fact that they're creating more evidence that are going to end up helping the case.
Prosecutors, they also found guns in the home, including a ghost gun, which is an unregistered firearm that's compiled from different parts, from different places, so it's untraceable. Take a look at this.
A photograph recovered from the cell phone analysis depicts Giacchina in the middle of two young children who are handling the ghost gun and the BB gun. On July 26, a photo from Jennings' phone depicts two children who are each pointing a gun at a third child. The third child has his hand up, and the laser from the ghost gun is illuminating his hand.
As if that wasn't terrifying enough, it gets even worse because Chulo's 4-year-old sibling participated in a forensic interview with special victims investigators and said that the two had been shot with a BB gun at one point too. Investigators even, and this is what we heard in the press conference too, that investigators reportedly found BBs in the wall of the home. And there is one line from the reporting that gets me particularly. It's that this 4-year-old allegedly told investigators, quote, "Chulo died all day and Danny was there," meaning Giacchina. Alina, talk to me about forensic interviews with children, because I imagine that has to be a very, very delicate but important part of the investigation.
Extremely important. Children are susceptible to having adults lead them in a certain direction. So that person that's conducting that interview has to be very cautious and ask a lot of open-ended questions. For instance, you can't say, "Did you see so-and-so shoot with a BB gun?" Because then they have the imagination, they have this idea that that took place. So you would have to just ask them, what happened? What have you seen? Did you see Danny that day? Did you see Chulo that day? But that quote just sums up the horror and the innocence of all of this.
And you might be asking, well, where was Child Protective Services, right? Where was CPS? Yeah. Well, when asked about whether CPS had been contacted about Chulo or the suspects before, the DA said she couldn't comment on that.
All children have a right to grow up in a home free of fear. This child and his siblings suffered unimaginable abuse and lived in fear every day. My office and the Madison Heights Police Department are committed to using every resource available to us to get justice for Chulo and hold the people responsible for his death accountable, and to seek punishment that reflects the horror of his death.
So Alina, yes, hopefully that's true, and hopefully they're able to fully prosecute this and get justice. But the other, and look, the two individuals here are innocent until proven guilty, although as we mentioned, the evidence looks really, really bad against them. I am curious about why no comment regarding CPS. Is it because it's too early in the investigation?
That kind of stood out to me as well. Maybe they aren't willing to release names of people that, maybe alerted CPS to this. I'm not really sure exactly what that means, but I would have to think that somebody outside of these two individuals and the children knew this was occurring. Do you never have somebody over to your house? Do they never see this child, ask about this child? Somebody had to have known, and it had to have been excused away as, well, he was being bad and he had to be punished. This just tells us all that we have a role in this. We all have to take a responsibility. If we see a child with injuries like these, if you're out shopping and you see this, make a call, The worst thing that happens is there's nothing to investigate, and the best thing that happens is you save somebody's life.
You know, I hate covering these kinds of cases. I really do. They're the toughest for me to cover. But I always say to myself, it's important, honestly, to get the story out for the particular victims and their family members. But like you said as well, this could be eerily similar to something that somebody else is observing right now. And if it's a way to save or protect a life, that's honestly the silver lining in all of this. But it is such a tragic case, and our hearts and prayers go out to Chulo's family. Alina Burroughs, thank you for coming on. Before I let you go, where can people find you? Where can they learn more information about you? Always appreciate your perspective. You're great.
Thanks for having me. And you can find me on social media at Alina Burroughs.
Alina Burroughs, thank you so much.
Thanks, Jesse.
All right, everybody, that's all we have for you right now here on Sidebar. Thank you so much for joining us. And as always, please subscribe on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, YouTube, wherever you get your podcasts. I'm Jesse Weber. Speak to you next time.